I want us to welcome Mr. Sudhir Sitapati, the Managing Director and CEO of Godrej Consumer Products Limited. Give it up. It's awesome. One of India's largest consumer goods multinationals with a presence in over 85 countries and serving 1.2 billion consumers. Those are some really awesome numbers. At GCPL, Sudhir is responsible for guiding the purpose and ambition of the company to bring the goodness of health and beauty to consumers in emerging markets. Prior to Godrej, Sudhir worked at Unilever for 22 long years, where he led teams across several categories and functions, multiple regions: Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and India. Currently, he's also the co-chair of the CII FMCG committee. Interesting two facts about Sudhir. He's the author of the book, The CEO Factory, The Management Lessons from Hindustan Unilever. Fascinating book. Along with being a business leader, he's also an excellent, accomplished sitar player, and he loves spending time at his farm in Alibag. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Mr. Sitapati.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, thanks for inviting me, firstly, Amit and team. It's the first time in all these years I've been to so many conferences where, surprisingly, I've been to a PR and Corpcom conference. And when Sujit asked me to speak here, I said, what will I speak about? And then when I was thinking about it, the examples that I wanted to speak about, I realized that while there are fewer, I've spoken in many advertising conferences, which is a kind of cousin of PR and Corpcom, and I realized that the 4 or 5 examples I have on PR and Corpcom I wanted to talk about are far fewer in frequency, but much higher in consequence. So this is an industry that you interact a little less with from where you are, but when you do interact, it's a make or break business for us. So what I thought I'd do is, I'd possibly just give a few examples, 2 from Unilever and 2 from Godrej, on PR and Corpcom and how it's made a difference to my life in various facets, and then perhaps open it out to questions in the interview. I think the first sort of example I'll give was, and the example, if it had gone wrong, I wouldn't be here with you. This was really in 2004, I think. I was a brand manager on brand Surf Excel, and we had got Jaunty Rhodes to come to India for an activation program called Win with Stains, where he was going across the country and washing stains. I don't know why, but anyway, he was going across and washing stains in cricket playgrounds. And it was fun. It was fun mainly because I got to hang out with Jaunty Rhodes for about 7-8 days. But at the end of this, we had our PR agency there organize a press conference. Not for me, for Jaunty Rhodes, right? So he was answering the questions, I was sitting around, and somewhere I was really kind of, I had just spent a year or 2 in brand management at that time. Somewhere somebody asked him some question, an innocuous question, he passed it on to me, I felt compelled to answer. And it was something to do with, what's happening on Surf Excel prices. I thought I gave a very kind of balanced, sort of an answer that wasn't really a controversial answer or anything. But the next day, this was Financial Express. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the hard copy. This carried it on the front page, right? And, when I went to office the next day, I was in the lunchroom, and I could see everybody was talking about me, saying, who's this kind of small guy who is, sort of a junior brand manager talking about Surf Excel prices. And it was really embarrassing. And I think in any other company, the person would have lost their job. It's out of the question. If somebody did this now, I would not allow them. I would be really, really harsh. But my boss at that time, Nitin, he called me to his room. He said, listen, you learned something from this? I said, yes, I've learned something. He said, okay, go. So I just want to say that the first experience with PR was a really tarnishing experience, really scary. That day was a really scary day. I really thought I'd lose my job. I think it's a 101 in PR. I was just so junior that nobody had even given me a 101 in PR. When I became a little senior, there used to be a 101 in PR that was given. So I was sort of before that. So I guess that was my first kind of brush with PR and CorpCom. I think the second brush that I had was a really interesting brush as well.
Diarrhea still kills 1.1 million children annually in developing countries. Lifebuoy believes this can be averted. The Mahakumbh Mela India 2013, the largest religious festival on the planet. Over 100 million people come here to pray together, live together, and eat together. Lifebuoy Soap saw this as the perfect opportunity to convey an important message. Always wash your hands with soap before you eat. Our medium? The roti or Indian bread. Served with almost every Indian meal. And the only way to eat it is with your hands. We created a heat stamp capable of leaving a simple message on a roti. Did you wash your hands with Lifebuoy? And over 30 days, a team of 100 people stood in 100 kitchens, stamping over 2.5 million fresh rotis, helping us to reach out to over 5 million visitors at the Mahakumbh Mela.
ऐसे हाथ धोए क्या?
So, will people remember to wash their hands before their next meal? Let's pray they do.
So this was a piece of communication, wasn't a piece of communication. One of our agencies which was doing some activation in Allahabad during the Kumbh Mela came up with this idea, and it came to my desk saying, look, we're doing this. We were actually supposed to be doing wall paintings and hoardings, but we're also doing this. And we were actually doing it in about 5 or 6 dhabas. I must be kind of, to start with in any case. But I think me and our team saw a PR potential. And it's talking about kind of low frequency, high consequences events. Lots and lots of ideas keep coming your way. But somehow we knows this saying, this is a high PR event. This has got something to it. And I think it was Ram who's sitting there in the audience. I think we put a small article in Eco Times saying, we're doing this. And suddenly you had foreign press carry it. Then very quickly, we said, okay, this idea has got PR potential. We made the video, and this was kind of slightly the pre kind of explosion in any case in India of social media. But we very quickly took a germ of a PR idea and sort of made a video, and this kind of became a very awarded thing. A lot of people even now remember it, and it's one of those really big kind of PR ideas, and it just started really small. So I guess the second thing, one, and I'm sort of talking about lessons. One is to keep your mouth shut, which is the first lesson that I learned. The second is that when you find an idea, and usually PR ideas are tiny, they're not big ideas. So one of the other kind of contradictions is when you come with a big PR idea, it usually fizzles out. We used to have this joke that every PR idea agencies would come and say, let's paint the Taj Mahal. But those are big ideas. But it's the small idea that if you find a small idea, you've got to sort of open your mouth in the life of brands. So this was the second. So the first was really an HR idea on PR. The second is really a brand idea on PR and its genesis. And I think the genesis of it was in a small column in the Economic Times, not a large press conference, but a small thing at the right spot and probably on the right day. I think the third thing I want to quickly talk about is CorpCom and PR as a driver of share price, right? So and when I joined GCPL, I sort of had to make 3-4 months after I came in, I made a presentation to analysts. And I spent a long time, in fact, the first 3-4 months, I was almost working my induction schedule in a way in which would lead to what I would communicate. So the communication was upfront in my mind in terms of what I would say, and I was working backwards to what I needed to find out within the organization. And these are just a few snippets from a presentation that, drove up, I think it drove up $1 billion of share price at the back of this presentation. But there were just some simple charts which I know a lot of people started using. And again, sort of, bringing in good communication, because I know many of you are PR, are work in the area of PR, and this is really important to CEOs, their share price. And I thought that the second and the third image, the first image was, having a strategy that was absolutely clear. So it said volume growth from category development. So there was a choice there, there was a simple message. There was a photograph, there was a second chart with me during COVID, and note the symbolism there, which is, in the middle of COVID, I'm sitting in the back of a bike and saying I've spent the last few months getting to know the company. There was one, which I had a video of me dancing somewhere in Kenya, which again, I know that a lot of, you get a sense when you communicate, you know what people like and what people don't. And finally, there was a chart which I still use, 3 years down the line, constantly going back to the chart on what's the strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. So till the 3 to 5 years get over, so I just felt that there's a lot of times, and many of you are helping CEOs, helping companies, but helping us talk to our analysts who buy into our company is super important to us. And this is just an example of, how important and how it can be done. And I think the fourth example is really PR in the age of social media. So a lot of this, part of it has to do with personal branding, part of it, it also helps the company and helps brands. And I kind of post once in 1 or 2 months, and I generally try to post, for every 1 post that I do on a brand, I do 3 posts on something that is relevant to the audience, which is outside brands. So I put this post out on going to Bihar and what I noticed in socio-economic conditions in rural Bihar 20 years after I went. And then periodically I would sort of, put a branded post. And my sort of team tells me that when a branded post comes up on a new brand, etc., we're able to see certainly conversations in e-commerce, etc., go up. So the management of PR in the social media world, especially in the Twitter, I don't use much, I use LinkedIn a lot, is again an area that I think a lot about, and it's the 4th dimension to PR and corporate communication. And in fact, probably as we speak today with the changing role of press, I just put out a post last week sort of defending my former colleague Dhaval Butch, who's in the middle of a controversy right now. And what happens when you put a post like that up is media channels carry LinkedIn posts. And that's what's happening now increasingly, whereas earlier on you would write to media and then sort of talk about what came in media, in social media. And I've seen a couple of examples of this. If you put something powerful on social media, you start seeing press carrying it. So, I mean, not to preach to the choir and so on and so forth, but I think the sort of lesson here is really kind of balancing what you want to say, which audiences like, and what you want to say that brands want to say. I think I just want to sort of say that there's only one thing that I've learned in all forms of communication. And that simple thing is, it's never about what you want to say. It's always about what they want to hear. And which is kind of the opposite of positioning. I'm a marketer, and I've constantly thought about what is the difference between positioning and proposition. And I've sort of now come to reconcile myself to the conclusion that positioning is not about what they want to hear, it's about who you are. They may or may not want to hear or they may or may not like you, but you've still got to position yourself. But having positioned yourself in a certain way, when you communicate, and which is what proposition is, it's not about what you want to say, it's about converting what you are into what they want to hear. And I guess that's the kind of simple kind of one line that I want to leave you all with in all forms of communication, is the one big learning. So with that, thank you very much. Yeah,
Well, thanks, Sudhir, so much for this insightful conversation and really interesting insights into the whole ecosystem. But, before I start, I want to say that I met Sudhir about 11 or 12 years ago, and he presented a book of Lifebuoy to me. It was a hardbound, glossy book, which I still hold very close. And it's that book that gave me a really interesting insight into the whole world of brands and marketing and the passion with which Sudhir actually drives the growth of so many of these brands and continues to do so at GCPL. So a big, big round of applause for Sudhir Sitapati. I want to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what you said in the presentation. And I want to begin by asking you about, the different elements in the ecosystem. We've had advertising, marketing, branding, and PR. Where is the intersection of all of these?
No, I think the intersection of all of them is pretty much in the end of what I wanted to, the last chart that I put up, which is, I'll tell you what is not the intersection of them. Not the intersection of them is what you want to say and who you are. That is something you've got to think about pretty deeply, and there is genuinely in today's day and age no right and wrong answer. You can be anything and have a large bunch of followers, right? And a large bunch of people who will kind of come to you. But I think the intersection then is, as I said, once you decide who you are, what you want to say is what I think connects all of these, which is marketing, PR, branding. All of them are connected by what you want to say, which is what people want to listen to. So and I think the heart of marketing is making that transition from who you are and converting who you are to what people want to hear about who you are. And that's the heart of it.
Right, really interesting. Sudhir, I also want to talk a little bit about the 101 in PR that you received at a very young age, like you just mentioned. But, I want to talk about the role of corporate communications in the whole business of building a leadership brand. What does it take, or how important is it for a corporate communication team to invest in building the brand of a CEO?
No, I think the corporate communication, and now I'm thinking more about it, sometimes we treat corporate communication as a media tool. And I think the role of corporate communication, and it's easy to say, but is essentially a more strategic role on converting this who you are to what people want to hear. And probably, a lot of you in the PR world and in the Corpcom world, that's a question that is probably more engaging and less thought about rather than how do you get, because the answer on Corpcom is, I want to say this, how do I get this out of people, right? And that's often, I'm sure many of you guys face that. That must be the common brief, right? I mean, I want to say this, but the real question is this what people want to listen to? And forget about what you want to say. You ask the question of who you are and help them figure out what you say that is interesting to other people. That actually, if you ask me, and I've had a lot of help in my career from a lot of people, and some of them are sitting in the room here, in this translation.
When you talk about help, it's also the kind of direction that the team gives you in terms of when a CEO should be vocal about something, when a CEO should be defensive about a situation. How important is that in the whole journey of building a brand?
I think it's super important. Timing is super important. As I said in the first two examples, most often you have to keep quiet. But there's an error of omission and an error of commission as well. So there's a time in which you have to say. And if you miss that opportunity, usually it's worse than saying, it's worse than saying something wrong. So that timing is super important. You do need professionals constantly advising you on, is the timing right, is the tenor right, is the tone right. But ultimately, whoever is the person who's communicating, whoever's in the ring, in the bullfight, that person has to take that call. But certainly advice is needed, because often in communication, all of us, including me, by the way, ego plays a big role. And somebody has to turn the mirror on whoever the communicator is, however powerful they are, however big they are, on, is this being said, in a way that is genuine and what people want to hear, or is there some amount of ego talking? So, yeah.
Right, I'm sure everybody in the audience is taking notes. on all of these points. But Sudhir, I want to talk about the in-house creative agency, which was your brainchild, Lightbox, that you created at GCPL. Tell us about how effectively an in-house agency can help build, the brand, ensure that there's effective communication and PR that's going out.
I think in Godrej, one of the things that I noticed was when I joined was we already had an in-house design team. Sujit and team are a pretty well-manned CopCom team doing a lot of brand communications. So in my earlier job, a lot of corporate communications was done by the company, but brand communications was kind of outsourced. So there was a slight difference between the two. I saw that in Godrej, both these were being done. And over a period of time, I asked the question on why this can't be done in advertising, because there is a lot of talent in Bombay. Bombay in particular is the talent hub for creative talent. One of the things that you certainly miss, and not always, because sometimes agencies that you work with in advertising, I've worked with Ogilvy and Lowe, you have people, or FCB, where people have spent many, many years in the brand, often more than the people on the brand. Increasingly, that's becoming an issue for us. Increasingly, we're finding there's a lot of rotation in agencies. And one of the things, again, I keep asking the question, how am I relevant to you guys, right? So that what can I say that's useful to you? It is certainly what we need from our agency partners is longevity, because the nature of corporates is such that people are moving and climbing and so on. This was a big, big thing that agencies provided to us 15, 20 years ago. Whenever a new brand manager came in, they would take out the archives, they would show the old print, they would say, look, I worked on this brand in 1985 and this is what happened, and somebody would come. But we now found that value kind of slightly disappearing with a large amount of churn. We also found consumer connectedness was something that we needed, and we felt creative people also needed to understand brands and consumers. So we came with this experiment. I mean, the other way of looking at it is it's another kind of creative house. All the talent has come from the agencies. It's a separate room, they have their own space, etc. So that's how it came.
Right, when you talk about these kind of campaigns and the kind of PR activities that are happening, this world is changing. In fact, when you look at the digital environment, it's a lot faster than what it was earlier. So do you think that PR strategy should be aligned specifically, differently to align it with the digital environment?
No, I don't actually think so. I mean, look, there's no question about the fact that PR is aligned, right? Like I just spoke to you about my last brush with PR. In fact, even somebody today was messaging me, which is this post I put on Dhaval, whom I know from a long time. And clearly it's the roles have reversed, digital first and then kind of media. But it hasn't made any difference to the way you think about it. So the advice that is needed on PR is, should I do this as a CEO, which is an advice I took from a lot of people, and if I do it, how do I say it and how do I write it? The medium actually is an overrated construct. The mediums change, and they naturally change, and you gravitate towards changing mediums. What is underrated is the kind of content of the message, the positioning of the brand, how you say it, and those are kind of medium agnostic.
Of course, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach as far as PR is also concerned. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of brands that you've built at Godrej, and you're building using this kind of, in this environment. So if you could talk a little bit about how PR is shaping up in these brands, specifically in brands categories like the household insecticide
segment.
segment.
I put up that, I didn't talk about it, I forgot to talk about it, but I had a really interesting experience a few weeks ago where the director showed us 2 cuts of a film. It was the same film, but 2 cuts. We tested both with consumers in our link, which is our internal testing. But before airing it, I put it up on LinkedIn and said, can you help us choose? And I must say that I got tremendous insight. And it's just the thing about many of these things is, we did it for fun, we did it for PR, but what I got out of it was, I got 200, 250 comments there. And I could sort of look at the comment and say, this is the kind of person that is commenting this. And after a long time, sometimes you have a bit of a learning stagnation. So in advertising, sometimes I feel I have a learning stagnation. I've spoken to so many consumers. But suddenly that day I felt I had a learning uplift because I was able to see live comments on choosing 2 different ads. And they're very, very different. One was a funny kind of right-brained ad. One was the same message in a left-brained ad. So these are the kind of interesting new ways in which PR is, and it's the influence. It's not so much the number of people you reach, it's the way it's getting people like us to think about it.
Right, I'm going to come to the audience questions in just a bit, but before that, Sudhir, I want to talk to you about something that everyone's been talking about, your passion for the sitar. How did it start?
No, it's
and
an overrated.
do you actually get time to
No,
play?
I don't. I'm not. And whoever said it, I'm nowhere near. I'm in what they call a kansen. I've played it as a kid for many years, but now, I mean, it'll be embarrassing. That day, Sujit made me with Mangalam Malu get my old rusted sitar out and play it on some TV program. But please be under no illusion. I might dress like one, but I am not one.
But Sudhir, you think about marketing strategies, go-to-market, all kind of business concepts in your mind. How do you unwind after like a long, tiring day? Of course, sitar, I'm assuming, is not something that you play every day.
Well, I certainly listen to a lot of music every day, but I really like nature a lot. So I have a house which I'm going to tomorrow. In fact, that's the reason I'm going to leave tonight near Kashid. And I like to be in green spaces. And after COVID, it's allowed me. So Monday, for example, I'm working from my farm, and I have a very simple farm. It's in the middle of a forest, a reasonably simple life, nothing fancy. It's a small kind of house. So what unwinds me the most is the environment and green. And at some visceral level, when I drove to Pune now, I was just thinking, it's like when I used to drive as a kid, this is a very different city. Because now you drive and there's the garbage and pollution and, sorry. But yeah, it really makes me feel bad the way the environment is going.
I think a lot of us in the audience have also read your book, The CEO Factory. So is Sudhir Sitapati, the author, also an avid reader? What was your last read?
Yeah, no, I am a very avid reader. I'm just thinking what's on my bedside. On my bedside, there's 2-3 books. I kind of change my moods depending on the book. So I'm reading this book by Siddhartha Mukherjee called The Song of the Cell, which is about the cell. I always keep, like some people keep the Bible next to them, I keep this book called Ulysses by James Joyce. It's one of those books that by the time I'm 80, I'll finish reading. But every other day, I read a page or two of Ulysses. I got to tell you, so that's always by my bedside. And I also keep Sherlock Holmes by my bedside. So depending on my mood. So there's one serious reading, one Sherlock Holmes if I'm in that kind of mood, and one Ulysses if I'm in that kind of mood.
And what's your go-to book? Any book that you've taken lessons from? You think that it's a book that I will refer to when I'm actually stuck in a situation, or any lessons that you take from a certain book?
I mean, look, I certainly take a lot of lessons from Sherlock Holmes, and a lot of my, I'm a real avid fan of Sherlock Holmes. I kind of know each story in and out and each quotation. So I used to be a quizzer as well. So I would say, but the other books that I really like are, I really like Joseph Heller's Catch-22. It's a book that I go back to often. And there's this book, which is not in publication, but any of you can get it. It's a really cult book called All About H. Hatter by G.V. Desani, who wrote it in '52. But that book is now out of circulation, not easy to get. But that's a masterpiece of Indian literature, which is, again, one of my favorite books.
Right, Sudhir, I have a lot of more questions. But before that, I want to open it up to the audience for a few quick questions before I come back with mine.
That relates to what the audience wants to hear.
Yeah, Sudhir, if you could just repeat that question in
Yeah, I think his question is that is customizing what you want to say by audience a good idea? Because I said you need to, I'll tell you one of my, sort of again, and many of you will disagree with it, that's fine, but I have found that good communication works across consumer cohorts. And I'll give you 2 examples of it, right? And the best example that I had was, again, when I was a brand manager, I once asked the question, various socio-economic groups across various states, what are they watching, right? So what was SEC A plus watching on TV? What is SEC A watching? SEC B watching? What are they watching in UP? What are they watching in Rajasthan? What are they watching in Maharashtra? the answer was, kyonki saas bhi kabhi bahu thi, across, right? So the point I want to make is that people tend to watch and see very similar things. We get excited by the dissimilarities, but the bigger story is not the dissimilarity. That actually is the exception. The bigger story is the similarity. Great ads are great for everybody. Great movies are great for everybody, right? And then there are differences, and then we kind of over-segment these and so on. So I would generally say that at least my lesson in communication is not proliferation, but is in getting that simplicity and that one thing that is really powerful, because the odds are it works for most audiences. So that's how I think about it, but I know that there's this big debate versus, audience of one and mass customization, but I can only tell you my own experience is the big idea and the big message tends to be universal.
Okay, anybody else with a question? I see somebody at the back.
We just had a session a while back on counterculture and the challenge of rebalancing growth with employee satisfaction. What kind of a role do you see public relations play in speaking truth to power in such scenarios?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to this question. The answer on truth to power is a super important and a super crucial role of public relations. Because public relations usually has access to the very top of an organization, and the very top of the organization actually has very few people who speak to them, and certainly even fewer people who speak truth. So having that access is a special power, because it's very rare that someone junior in the organization hires a public relations agency or speaks to CorpCom. So that integrity of corporate communications and public relations professionals, internal or external, speaking to CEO, I think is an absolutely crucial part of one of your job definitions and the ability to do it. You'll be surprised how much people appreciate truth to power. People who don't say it think that they will get eaten alive by the powers that be when they speak the truth. But the truth is that, people who are there are looking for people. I look for people who criticize and who to tell you the truth, because you automatically trust them. So don't underestimate, as corporate communications professionals, how much the CEO or senior management is looking for people to say this is stupid, this is wrong, and most people are reasonably thick-skinned. So don't couch it in kind of polite language. That's okay when you're fragile, and relatively junior people tend to be more fragile. But people who have kind of seen 20, 25 years are not fragile as well. So not only speak truth to power, but just speak it in abusive language if you have to.
All right. Anybody else?
Hi Sudhir, this is Suhail from Bayer. I lead digital communications. My question to you is, if you were to weigh in the benefits of leadership voice on social media, because everybody love to be there, would you say it benefits the brand more, or the leader, or the individual himself or herself? And at the same time, is it worth the risk that it also opens up for the brand?
I think it benefits all the three. I think it benefits the brand, the company, and the leader. And they're interrelated. They are not unrelated. As a CEO, and it's something I again think about, the personal brand is related to the corporate brand, is related to the brands that you sell. So there is no harm in, and a lot of people think about personal branding, there is no harm in thinking about personal branding and having a strategic approach to personal branding, but the principles remain the same, which is you've got to be consistent in who and what you are, and it's again, you can be anything, but you've got to be consistent in that. You've got to say things that is relevant to people and they want to hear it. And you've got to say it with a frequency that has some decorum. So, you shouldn't, it's like any other communication, you shouldn't overexpose yourself. But I certainly feel that this is an interrelated area. And you can go wrong, by the way. So it's not that you can't go wrong. And that is when the role of corporate communications and PR is to tell the CEO, hey, you're doing this for yourself, and this is not helping the brand. And that's a perfectly valid conversation to have. And nobody's going to be able to see that. I certainly can't see it. I certainly can't see when I'm pushing myself more than when I'm pushing the brand. And when I push myself, it helps the brand. So, I have Sujit here, who's constantly talking to me about these things. And that's a super important role that you guys have to play in getting us the right balance between these three.
I think we have time for one final question. Yes.
Hello, sir. I like the brilliance of simplicity in the communication, what you have communicated. My question is, how do you advise your brand team and brand communication teams and agencies about the culturally sensitive and religion-wise sensitive communications, which is becoming more and more of a nuisance these days, actually? The kind of brand portfolios you have under you, products under you.
No, I have to say that from my own experience over the last 25 years, I have found, I'm just repeating a point I've made before, but I have found differences in human beings overstated and similarities in human beings understated. I have found for example, she was talking about Lightbox, something that, in Unilever, and there are a couple of people here, has been doing for a long time. But when I came into GCPL, we had the same brand being advertised in 5 or 6 different countries. We're making 5 or 6 different ads. And a household insecticide product kills mosquitoes. There are fundamentally only 2 human insights. It lets you sleep better, or it kind of prevents you from getting dengue and malaria, and these are global. So one of the things that we immediately did was to do it the other way around, which is to move back communication globally and run it across the world. So now you will see, like in many multinationals, and I want to make this a nuanced point, so I don't want to make this an article of faith. But I would say that the tendency of most cohorts of people is to think of themselves as different. But when you take a step back, you just see that they're very, very similar, and it's easier to play on those similarities. So that's it doesn't fully answer the question, but
Right, Sudhir, I have one final point to make before we wrap up. I know the bell has gone, but Sudhir, 3 key points that you'd like to make very quickly on PR hacks to build a brand strategically. If you could tell us just 3 quick points.
I think it's a really abused word, but authenticity to what you really are. I think, in this postmodern world, we're going somewhat beyond good and evil. There is no straitjacket, and it's increasingly happening. I mean, look at the US elections, right? You look at it from a distance without getting emotional about it. It's a really postmodern election where there are just 2 really well-positioned candidates. So as a marketer, it's a delight. And both of them, whether you like them or you don't like them, are playing to the role that they've been given. So I would first say kind of being authentic and really understanding yourself is number one. I would say the second thing is sort of spotting that opportunity. You got to sense this opportunity, and it's a skill that people need. It's a skill, given the fact that I've now limited myself to 4 or 5 LinkedIn posts. 1 in 2 months is my kind of frequency. I'm constantly asking the question, what is it that I can post that will be sort of useful to people? So I would say authenticity, having a kind of nose for it. And I would say, and again, it's a sort of slightly lost skill in India, the ability for written communication. I had done a speech some time ago, for a JWT speech, and I was doing a lot of research on old advertising and advertisers. There was a certain grace in writing that we seem to have lost. So I certainly feel like there's a writing skill that the world seems to be increasingly losing, and I would say that's the third thing.
All right. I think thank you so much, Sudhir, for talking to us. And it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks
Thank you, Priya. Thank you.